Uh, so we're going to do this in three parts. First, each of us are going to briefly introduce ourselves and the topic that we want to talk about that relates to our generative AI use cases. Uh, then we're going to interact with each other, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A with all of you. So without further ado, I want to ask Scott Swigert to begin, and please introduce yourself and tell us about your use case.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dan. So if we go way back to the beginning, I got my start in technology, computers when I was 12, starting out on a VIC-20, if anybody remembers that, which shortly thereafter became a Commodore 64. Started writing code professionally in high school, continued through the late 90s, and transitioned over to teaching programming. So as things like .NET came out and those kind of things, I was really involved in teaching C# and other languages. Kind of meandered my way into competitive intelligence and market research for tech companies. So let me leverage my technical background, but in a little bit of a different way, explaining the market to these companies, explaining opportunities to them. And man, November of 2022, the world changed when ChatGPT came out. And like a lot of people, I think I immediately saw the potential or started to see the potential of what these technologies could bring and jumped on that with both feet. I also had co-founded a business, Cascade Insights, uh, and run that for 20 years. And then in July 2023, I uprooted myself and my technical team and replanted us in this great company called Shapiro+Raj, where we would just have more resources to devote to innovation and generative AI while we continue to kind of serve and advise tech clients. So the thing that we're doing that's pretty fun is a lot of what we do is market research, and market research is I've got this horrible term for it, which is a human to PowerPoint converter. So you go out and you interview a bunch of people, you survey them, and what comes out of that is a report, typically in PowerPoint format, you know, 60, 80, 100 slides. And you read out that report, you present that report, and people try to keep as much of that in their head as they can as they go on and live their lives and do their jobs. But it's really hard, it sits on a shelf, and it's not super user friendly to dive back into it and just try to find a simple answer. So using AI, we've built what we kind of think of as a PowerPoint to human converter. So rehumanizing the data and the reports so that you can ask it questions, and what we do to facilitate that is we create AI avatars. So if it's a segmentation study or personas, creating avatars that represent those segments that you can just ask questions of in a very natural way that's really grounded in the research. And it just works. Human beings really respond to this. They really like this as a way of interrogating the findings, understanding them deeper, doing things like message testing and creative testing. So Dan, back to you.
Well, thanks very much, Scott. Now I want to ask James, you've already sort of introduced yourself, but tell us a little more about yourself and then how you relate to the generative AI use cases we're talking about today.
I continue to work in venture M&A and training, and I spend a lot of time volunteering and mentoring, particularly mentoring kids, disadvantaged kids who are looking for an opportunity and a way up. And with that, let's move to the next slide, and I'll talk to you about my experience with GenAI. And it really starts with a phone call that I got from Dan Feinberg. Well, Dan, it was probably the end of 2022 when you had been playing around with generative AI when ChatGPT was released in November of 2022. You said there was something really there, and I didn't think that generative AI was particularly all that interesting. To me, it was derivative technology because we had cloud computing. There were chatbots that people like Nuance Software created to help with call center automation. I've worked with plenty of quant jocks in my years of consulting, so I'd seen, algorithms created, and we exercise those algorithms on some pretty big data sets, much the same way that Scott talks about. You get a 100-slide, consultant slide deck with all the data and all the analysis, and that's a pretty big file. So I thought, this isn't unique. And the more I began to play with it, the more Dan and Michael and I began to talk about, the more I realized it truly applied to all content functions within any business, regardless of size. Because if you look at any function within a business, each function creates content. HR creates reviews. The CFO produces annual and quarterly reports. Marketing creates blogs, the website. Sales creates scripts. We all create content. And what it really struck me, working with the Fusion Syndicate, is that the approach, there is an approach that makes a lot of sense when you're thinking about creating an engineered a prompt. First, you got to document and fully understand the business process that you're trying to accelerate. Then you need, and I think, by the way, this favors older people who've been understand detailed workflows. You need to understand the step by step by step workflow that you need to engage in to get the result that you want from generative AI. And Dan is going to talk about what he calls a chunking function here when he gets his opportunity to speak. And then what Dan always reminded me is once you get the output, remember, number one, these things hallucinate. And you need to iterate, 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 iterate. And I know Scott would agree with me with that as well. And so what it boils down to for me, when I finally realized it wasn't derivative technology, it was something truly unique that would change things, is that we can vastly improve content productivity from creation through management of that content and analysis of that content. And then our personal experience as an organization, the Intel Alumni Network, we're trying to eat AI dog food here, folks. We're trying to show how you use next generation technology. We utilize the Fusion Syndicate and Dan and Mike's services regularly to help us with the creation of our events, and the abstracts, the promotions, etc. So this is a big deal, kind of thing. And the use cases that Dan is going to talk about here coming up really are nothing less than remarkable from my perspective. And with that, Dan, you got the floor.
When ChatGPT came out, as James mentioned, in November of 22, I got really excited about it because I could see that this was a way to apply natural language to do things that you could never do before with a computer or anything else. And so with partners, we formed the Fusion Syndicate and started diving into prompt engineering and applying our core expertise in marketing and communications with prompt engineering and human insight and oversight to do things we couldn't do before. And I want to talk about a couple of specific use cases now. And this slide either makes your eyes roll in the back of your head or it's really interesting to you. I'm not sure what. To me, it's really interesting. What it shows is the degree to which these AI chatbots like ChatGPT and Copilot and Google Gemini and Claude from Anthropic stop doing a great job after a certain point. In the green zone, you can see that if you're within a certain capacity of both the size of your inputs and also the size of the outputs you're trying to get. Like Scott was talking about the inputs being this 100-page PowerPoint document that you want to have a conversation with, and then the outputs are the conversation that you're having, for example. Well, you can get much better accuracy and much better performance if you keep within about 40% of the maximum capacity on the inputs and outputs of a given platform. That's what this chart is showing. And so what that means in practical use is that if you're building prompts like the Fusion Syndicate does, not only do your prompts need to be within a certain size, but the work that those prompts are collaborating with the user to generate need to be chunked so that you can create very large, sophisticated things like 40-page marketing plans or detailed proof of concept proposals. Part of it is the step-by-step interaction with the user. That's an important element of the way we do our prompts. Then the question is, how does the chatbot go about generating the output? There too, you want to divide things up. So in the case of a marketing plan, you might have, 6, 8, 10 different sections, the competitive analysis, the positioning, the advertising, the PR, the events, whatever. Do those one at a time, but have the same overarching themes of I want the objectives and the schedule and the budget and some examples of deliverables, for each, right? And then you'll get great stuff in lots of detail, and you can then put it all together to have this massive, sophisticated output. But Scott, what's your experience with this concept?
Yeah, I think about, it has an analogy in research. In a survey, you should never ask a double-barreled question, right? You should never basically ask two questions as one. And you could get away with that to some degree with large language models. You can say, tell me about this, and tell me about this, and tell me about this. But a flag should go off anytime you're using the word and in a prompt. So, like, let's say we want the AI, I talked about these avatars. So let's say we load some market research in. We might say, what are the personas you detect in the research? Just to make sure it can read the research and it can understand, you know, who the different market segments are in there. And then we might say, how would you define those segments or those personas? So then it gives it does some summarization. And then you say, now I want you to role play those segments. So that's probably going to give you a better output than if you just put it in and say, role play the segments you find in this research, because you're asking it to kind of do multiple steps at once. Other things, that are good in working with some of the stuff that Dan has built is the output becomes the input. So the things that the AI is outputting along the way as answers to earlier questions are part of all of that chain, is part of the input for the next question and the next question. And so, having it output its thinking, its intermediate steps, those kind of things all help you get to a better answer. Even if the AI just knows it, if you say, I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to give me the answer, but I also want you to tell me how you know that answer, that will just give you a better answer, because you're forcing it to kind of think step by step and output its thinking, which then becomes part of the input that it builds on.
I found a great trick along the lines that you just described that worked better than I would have imagined. As I was building a marketing plan the way I had described, I asked the chat bot, what are the questions you need me, the user, to answer in order for you to successfully fill out these sections? And it gave me a list of questions. And then I started a new session and asked the chatbot those questions, and it used its online research capability to get really good answers. And then I fed those answers back, and it used them to build the marketing plan. I mean, how cool is that?
So Dan,
Yeah.
how you said that was what, 40 pages of content,
Yeah, and I could have
AI
gone
assisted
forever.
content, and how from beginning to end, right? Because you understand the core business process around writing a marketing plan, and I think you understand a fair amount about the detailed workflow. But you
Yeah,
still
that's
had to
my
do a
area.
lot of
Yeah.
thinking on your part. But describe that process to the audience.
Okay, well, it all began with first creating a very complex conversational prompt to build marketing plans, or actually marketing communications plans, Marcom plans. And so I used not only what I know from my 43 years of doing that kind of stuff, but also I did a bunch of research using generative AI to gather uh, other people's knowledge about how to do this, which I then curated and vetted and used legally with permission, and built that into what's called a knowledge document. ChatGPT Plus has the ability to train the GPTs that you build. They're not just prompts, but they also have data, and that data could be PDFs or Word documents, and then it reads that every time. So I put documents in how to create a Marcom plan basically in there, right? And then the prompt asks all these questions that relate to that. And based on how the user answers, the prompt knows whether or not it needs to dive deeper into those questions or not. And then so having that GPT available and then being the user using it, uh, it gave me a framework, a semi-populated outline. And a good start, and something that would save a marketing team at least 50% of the time of creating a marketing plan, because it removes all the uncertainty of, oh, gee, did we cover all the marketing mix? Oh, we forgot PR, that kind of stuff, right? and within that, oh, we got to think about budget too, don't we? So it makes sure that you have all the right stuff covered, and it starts filling in some of your specific stuff, but it's not in depth. And so that's where that idea of what questions do you need me to answer, and then going and getting them, and what I said earlier came in. And man, did that work. Oh, just
So,
brilliantly.
compare and contrast, Dan. We talk about the improved productivity by utilizing these tools. So, if you would normally create this, how long would it take, and compare it to with the experience of doing it with generative AI in terms of time, hours spent, days spent?
Well, I could not have created that 40-page Marcom plan myself, even though I think of myself as an expert in the field. Uh, it's far higher quality than I could have done, in say 2 weeks.
Yeah, and that's something too that I'll just chime in on. The old saying was good, cheap, fast, pick two. Um, AI gives you all three. You get cheaper, you get faster, but the big thing that you also realize is you get better. I mean, when we're using it for the things we're using it for, we're producing better findings, better insights, better deliverables than we've ever produced, because we're looking into all of those blind spots. We're looking into all of those nooks and crannies. We're going the extra mile where it just wasn't feasible before. We're synthesizing lots of secondary data that, just wouldn't have been feasible before to do as part of a project. And so it's really the magical thing about it is it's one of the only technologies that really gives you better, cheaper, and faster.
Then how do you explain that to the client?
Can I jump in? I think there's three metrics for productivity: efficiency, effectiveness, and quality.
Okay.
Efficiency is the savings in time and money, and I'd say it's about a 5x uh, efficiency factor in my experience for creating a marketing plan specifically. Effectiveness is how many objectives can you meet, things you couldn't do before. So that's what I was saying. Not only one of the reasons the quality is better, which is another metric I'll get to, is that I was able to include in the marketing plan elements that I otherwise would not have been able to include. So it did more. And then the third one, quality, that's purely a function of customer satisfaction. So, if the client loves the marketing plan, um, that's quality.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm just thinking about it, particularly, I mean, you guys are both in kind of the agency world, and that, as a tool, as a consultant, this is absolutely incredible, right? But if we turn that to internal marketing departments, what should they be thinking about in terms of how they should accurately, ethically, and safely adopt this kind of technology? I mean, besides calling either one of you guys up and putting you on contract, which I would suggest, what would they do? What are the step by step? Let's start with Scott. What would you recommend to a client when they're thinking about this?
So they come to us because they have uncertainty. There's things that if they knew, they would do a better job. And so, they go to an agency like us and they say, we need answers, we need insights. We need you to tell us what to do. And so we go out and we do research. And so we're using it on our side. And a funny thing happens on the way to entering less hours in the timesheet, which is, and this is also happening in the marketing departments that we're talking to, is people are saying like, hey, we're not looking to lay people off. We're not looking to have less staff in the marketing department. What we really want to do is we really want to use that time that's freed up. We want to reinvest it. We want to plow it back into doing a better job. We want to get to some of the basics that get crowded out. And so, sure, over time it'll lead to efficiencies, it'll lead to, less people doing more stuff. But right now, we're not seeing that anybody's looking at it from a staff reduction standpoint. They're looking at it as how do we up our game? I was talking to a CMO the other day, and they said, the cost of content production is going to zero. So how do we stand out? And I saw somebody offering their services on Twitter that said, hey, in 24 hours, I can produce 250,000 words on you, however many blog posts that is, on whatever topic you want. And that is just the sea of sewage that marketers are trying to stand
Yeah,
out in. And
yeah.
so there's a lot of opportunity to get smarter faster than um just focusing on like efficiency and how can we do more with less.
Well,
That's totally true. Can I just give an example of that? In 1991, I ran the marketing communications for Intel's local area networking product launch that brought Intel into the LAN market, all 21 products all at once. And leading up to that, we did market research. And we spent in 1991 about $35,000 doing two market research focus group panels, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, asking questions about the LAN adapters to LAN administrators about, what do you think makes these good? And we learned a lot, and it completely changed our messaging and our positioning, and I'm so grateful we did it. But getting Intel at that time to spend that kind of money, I had a $7 million budget, and I had to fight to spend $30,000 of it on market research because people just thought, wow, we don't have, we gotta use it on advertising. We don't have enough. So what Scott's saying is true, is now it's a no-brainer to do that kind of market research. And that improves the outcome because now you understand how to market your product better, and what's that worth? I mean, Intel went from 0 to number 2 market share almost overnight because we did it right, you know? So that's what it's worth.
Yeah, and the other thing too that I think, so the way technology rolls out, it always starts initially with, um, is it compatible with all of our existing practices, right? Can we use this technology? Can we just drop it in as a replacement or as an augmentation for something that we're already doing? But then as technology diffuses, people start using it in ways that there just wasn't something there before. And I think of smartphone cameras. So I don't know about the rest of you, but when there used to be these things called film cameras, and I don't know about the rest of you, but I didn't take one to the restaurant with me and photograph my food and take uh, my film into Fred Meyer's and get it developed and then, show everybody what I ate, right? I didn't take a camera to the grocery store and photograph something to find out if it, get the film developed and ask my wife a week later if that was the thing she wanted me to buy. But when the smartphone came out, it basically expanded the use cases for photography, right? Photography, now is, I installed a Nest thermostat and it said, hey, before you unplug anything, take a picture of your wiring. It just assumed photography as a capability that everybody had. And you
Right.
see that all the time, photograph a check and deposit it. So these are use cases that just wouldn't have been possible. And thinking about, my domain, but this applies to all domains. This is the sort of thing that we're thinking about is, you just brought it up. Doing message testing with market research was tens of thousands of dollars. It took weeks, if not months, to do it. You did it only for the really big bets. Well, what if you can have avatars that are built off previous research you've done come to your marketing meetings, right? What if you can bounce ideas off of them in real time? What if an agency can run really extensive testing of your concepts and have that back to you in a couple of days, in a rich report, quantitative, qualitative, all of this kind of stuff. Anytime you can take technology that used to be sort of outside of the loop and unavailable and put it inside of the loop, now it's something transformative. And where we do it with market research, and kind of helping marketers inside of their creative loops is one thing, but there's a million of these where AI is just going to get invited to the party, where whatever technology it's replacing used to kind of sit on the outside.
And using techniques like chunking enables you to do that in as deep a way you want to go.
Yeah.
The capacity limits of the technology don't really matter. You can work around them.
This brings up something I'm following on what Scott said. This creates the sewage problem, right? When anything becomes free, right? We all know what happens when things become free, right? And so, you have we're
Oh,
going to get tons of crap that's going to get created.
yeah, yeah.
We got questions around who owns the output. Is it copyrightable? do humans actually, and I think Scott, you kind of answered this, humans really do need to be involved, particularly like when you're creating an avatar. I remember when you and I first chatted about this, you still had to rely on some either prior primary research that you did, right?
Yep.
Or you had to go out and interview some people then to create a basic framework around the avatars that you could then go interrogate and make smarter with generative AI. So what it is it's, again, I'm asking more of an operational questions. I mean, how do we filter out, if we're going to use these tools, filter out the crap while making sure we don't violate anyone's copyright, that we don't, as employees, give away intellectual property because we used an open-ended chat engine to make queries. When I'm looking for you guys, because you guys have a deep level domain expertise here, talk to us a little bit. Let's start with Scott. Some of the tips and tricks that you ought to be thinking about when you're leveraging this technology to avoid some of the things I just highlighted.
You got to be hands-on. I mean, that's the biggest thing, is use cases come from use, and your ability to discern whether something is good or not comes from use. And so dedicating a certain amount of time um, to being hands-on with this stuff and doing experimentation, I think is critical. I mean, Dan, you wouldn't be where you are with, the Fusion Syndicate stuff and the things you're doing if you hadn't been hands-on with it. And I see the same thing. I'll see these AI announcements. I forget which one was. It was stupid. It was so stupid and pointless. And I see so much of this where companies are just shoving stuff out there to show that they're, in the arena. It's just unusably bad. It's whatever 2 steps before minimum viable product is. And so some of it is being hands-on with it. Some of it is seeing what stuff, if you're tracking, kind of thought leaders in the community, what stuff keeps getting brought up over and over and over again, because the stuff that keeps getting brought up probably has legs.
But James, I think your question had to do with really 2 key points: value in the age of commoditization and
Yes.
IP protection in terms of
Right.
copyrights and so on. And so, and I think you answered the question when you were talking about workflows and process. What you're really talking about is expertise, that each domain has its own set of processes and workflows and content, and there are people who are experts in these areas and ways to gain expertise in these areas, and applying that expertise to solutions using generative AI is the key. The expertise is the value, and the generative AI helps deliver that value. But if that expertise isn't there, then there's no value. It's just hollow. The expertise is knowledge. The know-how is the IP, right? The thing that needs to be protected.
Dan, so is what you're saying is that the prompt, creating the prompt itself, that is an act of creating intellectual property from your perspective?
Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's protectable. But what about the output, right? I mean, because one of the things you told, really emphasized with me is the importance of adopting Gen AI in such a way, particularly if you're a going concern, a going business, in a way that is going to protect your data within that enterprise, while at the same time
Oh,
being
yeah,
able to
yeah.
get access to external resources too, because you need access to, if you're going to create a marketing plan, you need to go find out what your competitors are doing. So by definition, you're going outside the firewall. But at the
Yeah,
same
that's huge.
time,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
how do people think about this?
Yeah, that's huge. And again, I'll invite Scott to comment as well. But what's happened is the major platforms, ChatGPT, Google, Gemini now it's called, Microsoft Copilot, and Anthropic Claude, all have, public free platforms where you don't want to put your private data because it all goes out to the internet, right? But then they have these intermediate pro platforms where they generally promise not to train their models on whatever you put in, but your stuff's still going out to the internet. So it's still, not something an enterprise would, not something Intel would put their IP on. But then there's these enterprise versions that do apply all the data security and privacy kinds of technologies that they have available, and do the best job they can to really provide that security. So companies like Intel will use that level of offering, the enterprise offering, to be able to train the models on their own data, the product roadmaps, what have you, and get the productivity and do so without risking their IP.
Scott, particularly for you also, let me add to that, how do you kind of justify, this is a question from a fellow consultant, how do you demonstrate the value that Shapiro+Raj delivers in a world where generative AI is doing a lot of work? What is the value that you bring to the party?
There's an interesting thing about research, which is if you can ask ChatGPT a question and get the answer, you shouldn't research it, right? If you can ask Google a question and get the answer, you shouldn't research it. So research, I think, lives in a domain where the knowledge is in people's heads, or maybe it is in an aggregation of secondary data that hasn't really been done yet. And so in a business case, right, somebody's evaluating, let's say that they're evaluating the different AI platforms that are out there, and they're thinking about, they're a software development company, and they're thinking about, hey, do we run an open source model like Llama and we run it in our own data center? Do we send our data out to OpenAI or Microsoft Azure? Is the technology there to support the use cases we want? Like, you're not going to find what these software companies are thinking in their heads online because they haven't released it. They're not talking about it. So at some point, there's value in getting the information that isn't in the training data sets yet, talking to people, getting the data that's out of their head. And now you've got something, sure, maybe you process that data a little faster, maybe you build your report a little bit faster. But I don't think we're at the point where AI is going to know the answers to all the old questions. It's not inventing what comes next. That's, for now, that's still us. And so if you want to find out about that, if you want to find out about what's coming next, what are people thinking about? I've talked to 30 people. I want to distill some, 4 patterns out of this that show up over and over again. The human beings still matter because, they're building on top of these, shoulders of artificial giants at this point. But there's still a use in that. So I'm not really worried about it. And then things like the avatars just provide more value to that kind of stuff. So now you can put them inside of the loop. You can have them at your disposal. They can answer whatever questions they know about. I'll give you my crazy, at the risk of hogging the microphone, I'll give you my crazy view of the future. I think in terms of jobs to be done, and what's the job that research does? Well, the first job is it burns a pile of cash because it's expensive. The second job that research does, it makes you wait 2 or 3 months because it's slow. And then the third job it does is it answers your questions, right? Like, you had questions, you do research, now you've got answers, you got better insights. What do people think of this messaging? Who are these customers? What are their pain points? Blah, 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 blah. So, where do you want to go for those answers in the future? And I think AI is going to become the great intermediator. You'll have an AI inside of your company, and any business question you have, you'll just go ask the AI and you'll see if it knows the answer. And maybe it'll pull that answer from the internet. Maybe it'll pull it from the repository of research that you've already done. It'll have access to everything. Maybe it'll pull it from your CRM system. But what will trigger companies like us is somebody will ask a question that Jarvis doesn't know the answer to. And it will say, basically, hey, we can go hire an agency and spend tens of thousands of dollars with them. And then Jarvis will know the answer to this question then. And that's, so research won't be about reports and readouts. I think a lot of stuff is going to be about enriching what the AI knows. And the AI is just available across the company anytime somebody has a question.
Once you've got the avatar created from a research perspective, based on, real human survey questions, doing A/B testing, etc., you create the avatar, and then you keep training the avatar over time to get better and better and better and better. And not to belabor the sewage point, right? But now you're able to do tests, right, to be able to separate quality from sewage by asking the avatar, rather than spending the time and money to interview someone directly, what is their opinion about X, Y, and Z? Is that kind of sort of how it works, and
Yeah,
it just gets better over time?
yeah, you're feeding the avatar, steamed broccoli and grass-fed beef, and you're not feeding it the sewage, right? You're giving the avatar kind of high quality
Quality,
inputs,
right, right.
which could be a variety of different sources.
And I think also this applies to the difference between primary and secondary research, if I'm hearing you right, Scott, because secondary research, you can go to Google and it can find all the stuff and bring you back things, and you can use GenAI to find patterns in it or whatever. That's one thing. But primary research, where the knowledge hasn't already been developed, where you have to go find out, like Jane Goodall and the chimps, observing them and doing ethnographic research, and oh, they behave this way, that's to me the great value of doing, say, a focus group. And the story I told about 1991, what we learned, we never could have learned from looking at past research because it was a new thing. We thought that people would love our Ethernet LAN adapters because they only had 7 chips instead of 30 chips, and so they were faster, better, and cheaper. No, people didn't care how many chips were on it. LAN administrators didn't think about chips. But what they did like was we had a little piece of software that automated the installation and saved them a half hour per computer. We had never thought that that was a big deal. That changed our messaging. Well, that was only possible, that insight, through primary research, through
You
a
Right.
got it.
focus group, you know?
But I mean,
Okay.
at some point, what humans think may not matter. It may just come down to what AIs think. But for the next decade or so, yeah, how do we respond to this new stuff? And especially with AI, especially when so much is new, what are the use cases people are thinking about? What are the scenarios people are trying to enable? Knowing about that stuff, a month faster than your competition is valuable. And if it just lives in people's heads, you got to go out and get it from the source. If you use something like ChatGPT Enterprise and you put a product roadmap in there and you want to write marketing on it, well, you're giving it to OpenAI, and you're getting a response back from the large language model. And the promise they give you is when they train the next version of their language model, your stuff is not part of their training data set. And that's honestly really important, because if you put a bunch of sensitive information in it and it is part of the future training data set, then it just knows all that stuff. And so if a competitor comes along and asks, what is company XYZ up to, it just knows the answer. So it is important to use those models in such a way where you're using them under an assurance that they're not doing training. Do you trust OpenAI as much as you trust Microsoft? That's really the question, right? I probably do. I've got a high tolerance for risk.
Can you point this person to a method or a way of building a personalized GPT agent that reflects knowledge in a large library of personal documents?
Yeah, yeah. And this is for personal use this way. ChatGPT Plus, $20 a month, gives you the ability to do exactly what you just described, because you can not only write a prompt that will run on ChatGPT, but as I mentioned earlier, you can have what are called knowledge documents, which you can upload, I think, as many as you want, pretty much. I mean, there is a capacity limit, but I have many GPTs where I've got, like 12 PDFs or something that have different aspects of knowledge that I want to use. So yeah, you
And
could definitely
that's
do that.
just on your hard drive or your
My
cloud
user
storage
space.
system, your
Yeah. So
user space.
I'm
Okay.
trusting OpenAI with that. But for personal use, it's not, like a big Fortune 50 company doing that, right? And then there are, again, the enterprise versions of this that also let you do that where it is more secure, and it's a broader application of that concept.
Okay. Scott, any thoughts along those lines?
No, what you want to look at is the feature they call GPTs. So GPTs let you upload source documents and then have a conversation with them, or ask it to do something where it pulls the knowledge on how to do that from the source documentation that you've provided. It's fantastic.
So Dan,
Yeah.
quite literally, if I wanted to summarize, I was on a 3-year, channel strategy project for Microsoft at a consulting firm that I was at 15 years ago.
Mhm.
I could literally go to my file of all of the client presentations we did and write a prompt, said, hey, summarize these 10 documents and give me an analysis of what we said?
Yeah, theoretically. In fact, I've recently done just that.
Okay.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the way you would do it with ChatGPT Plus, there's a couple different approaches you could take. One is you go to where it says create a GPT, and you click on that, and you enter the instructions just like you said, James. Just a couple sentences. Read all these documents and tell me the pattern. Whatever it is. And then you go down to where it says upload knowledge documents, and you just click the button, and it says copy from your hard drive, and you just find the PDFs or the images or the text files or the docs or whatever, and put them all in there. And then when you start the prompt, it will review the knowledge document. So it'll take like a minute or two to read all that stuff. There's other techniques you can use, like you can actually attach a document while you're using the prompt in ChatGPT Plus and in Copilot Pro, and also in Claude, the free version even. So that's, instead of putting in ahead of time and training it on the stuff, you're putting it in during use, and then it's reviewing it.
Yeah. Well,
then.
I've done that a couple times when I've been creating intermediate content that I've wanted you to then help me with. And that's been very effective. Writing a very simple prompt, and then saying, and use this as a source document to generate something that looks like this in the voice of voice of Andy Grove in
Yeah.
teaching mode, right? And then I generate that, save the file, send it to you, and then you do your magic and
Right.
take it to the
I
next
can
step.
input your 500-word essay into any of these, like say Claude 2 is what I used. And then I have a prompt that, can use that as context to generate a bigger deliverable out of it. Yeah.
Because then the next question that leads on to this, because there are plenty of examples of lawyers, marketers, researchers, not to cast any aspersions on our friend Scott here about being a researcher, that have AI has yielded some really horrible hallucinations. We've heard about hallucinations. I've experienced them, but Scott, maybe you can comment. What is this all about, and how do we separate wheat from chaff?
In terms of hallucinations in general, there's two things. One, the rate of hallucinations have gone down. The people producing the models, as they release newer versions of them, are less prone to hallucination. The other one is anti-hallucination prompting. So asking the model, if we ask the model, like, hey, what does Joe, one of the personas in the research, what is Joe likely to think of this concept that we're showing Joe, this messaging? Maybe that has hallucination in it, maybe it doesn't. But if I say, what is Joe likely to think of this messaging? And show your work, show me how you are coming up with this answer based on the data you've provided and what inferences you're making. The show your work stuff, one, it just produces a better output. It's less likely to hallucinate when it knows it has to show its work. It's kind of like a person. And two, you can look at that. You can look at the data points it connected and the inferences it told you it made, and you can say, like, that is totally logical. The way you connected those data points makes sense. Or you can say, I think you misinterpreted something, in that research or in that source data. So show your work is honestly one of the best things you can do, or explain your thinking is one of the best things you can do to rate the quality of the output above
Right
just
on.
about anything else, and know that you're in or out of hallucination territory. If you ask it a question for which there's nothing in the research to answer, it will make something up, and then it will say, there wasn't really anything in the research about this, but this is what I think. And then you're like, okay, well, that's just
Okay.
hallucination.
Can I just quickly add to that? You're so right. So there's two basic things to deal with these problems of hallucination, and bias is another one, by the way. So one is the mitigation within the prompts, and that was a great technique that you said that we also use. The other is human insight and oversight always have to be part of the equation. You don't just give a job to AI and then expect the finished product. You have to review and evaluate, just like if a human had created the content. And you have to, check for accuracy, among other things. But I want to tell a quick story real fast. So I was working with someone who was interested in a prompt for teachers to create lesson plans. And so I was able to come up with something that worked really well. And then a question was asked, well, what about bias? Because, that's a real deal with generative AI, and, in public schools, that's, we got to be especially sensitive to that. And I thought, wow, we have these quality assurance practices that we build into our prompts to deal with things like hallucinations, but we hadn't tackled bias yet. So I thought, I'm going to ask Google Gemini, which is really good at teaching you stuff and really good at programming, how can I build in quality assurance instructions in my prompts to deal with the bias issues that are generally known about, these platforms? And it gave me actual stuff I could copy and paste and put into my prompt that really worked. Um, I mean, I could read it to you. It said, before generating the primary output, run the following counterfactual scenarios, but don't include their responses in the final output. What if the user's gender was opposite gender? Would your answer need to change? And anyway, it goes on and on. But that's the kind of stuff that it gave me, and I put it in the prompt, and it works.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about using generative AI to create better generative AI. You know what I mean?
Well, that's going to be the process. And with that, we are past the top of the hour. And I want to thank I want to thank you, Dan, and thank you, Scott, for participating in this. Thank you, folks. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time with the Intel Alumni Network. Bye for now.